We are back for part 2 of my chat with Hope Limyansky-Smith. And I am personally very excited to get into this portion of our conversation, more specifically about online education. Because, man, from my side of it, sometimes it can feel like the Wild West out there. And frankly, from the side of when I was a student, trying to understand who I could trust or not. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before we get into it, I want to point out something that may have gotten missed in part 1. If you were, just casually listening along while hopefully mostly paying attention to the work you are actually making. Hope approaches what she does on social media as a second full-time job. Her words, not mine. A full-time job, my friends. So if you listened to us chat last week and have been sort of overwhelmed at the idea of hearing, like, you should be posting more, you should be doing more, you should be whatever on the internet, I just want to take a very important pause before we dive into part 2 of this conversation and remind you, whenever the word should comes up in your mind, question living bejesus out of it. I clearly wanted to use a much stronger word there, but I'm only at the intro portion of this podcast episode, so I figured dropping the F-bomb right away without advance warning would be a bit much. But you get my point. Always think critically when the word should comes to mind. Shoulds typically don't do us any good. Unless, of course, it's I should get off my phone and play with the dog. That is always helpful. But shoulds around social media, our business, the shoulds that are based solely on what we see someone else doing and then feeling guilty we aren't doing the same thing, those shoulds are usually garbage. And if you don't believe me, let me put it bluntly. I do not post 5 days a week to any social media platform, nor have I ever throughout the 14 years of being self-employed. Even when my wedding photography businesses were the full income of my entire livelihood, I still didn't post that much on social media. And I grew that photography business to over, frankly, $200,000 in gross revenue without posting every single day on Instagram. Now, that's a totally different business model than making pots, so that's a conversation for another time. The point is, there are options. Instagram is one of those options. YouTube is also one of those options. Selling in person is another option. Not even bothering with social media at all is also one of those options. Now, discussing all of these options and the business models and the lifestyles that come with them is a far more nuanced conversation than I can fit into the introduction of a podcast episode. And by now, you probably know exactly where deep, nuanced conversations are happening. So yes, if you want to chat more about this, then by all means, please come on over and join us in the community, because that's exactly the perfect space to get into all of this. And if this is the first time you're hearing me mention the community, then you can learn more at makersplaybook.com/community. But in the meantime, let's first get into part 2 of my chat with Hope Limyansky-Smith right after a quick message from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by the Rosenfield collection of functional ceramic art. The collection exists as an online source for research and inspiration, featuring photos of objects made by over 1,000 artists. The images are high quality and can be used with no permission required, making them a great source for students and teachers. To find out more, visit www.rosenfieldcollection.com. A special thank you to the Archie Bray Foundation for sponsoring this episode of The Maker's Playbook. The Bray clay business is your best source for Bray epoxy, a two-part moldable epoxy intended for post-firing repairs. Working like clay, it's easy to shape, texture, fill gaps, and recreate missing parts. Bray epoxy is sold in tan, white, and black base colors, with a 9-color kit that will allow you to perfectly disguise your repair. Order anytime online at archiebrayclay.com. Now, on with the show. Welcome to the Maker's Playbook, the show where we talk all about what it's really like to make a living from the things you make. I'm your host, seasoned entrepreneur of 14 years, Rebecca Ikes Cara. Speaking of those of us that work too much, before I went down that tangent, what we were saying I thought was a really great segue to talk about boundaries on the internet. Because I also think it's really, one, it's really important, but also I think there's a lot of assumptions as well around what people have to or need to post to grow in terms of showing your face online, in terms of sharing your personal life, in terms of whatever else. And I look to you, I look to Joe at Old Forge, Jackie Wright, like there's a lot of examples if people actually dig into it. There is a way in order to create a space online to be successful in growing a space online, but also keep boundaries that are best for your own health and well-being and comfort level, which people might not really recognize in your content because they're like, well, you're on video every day, you're putting yourself out there. And it's like, well, no, I don't think people would know that much about your personal life if they were on your Instagram.
Yeah. No, I don't think so. And it's actually kind of funny. I think the epitome of that really is I went through a difficult time last year. I just had a lot going on in my personal life. And I'd gotten together with some family members and they were like, you are just crushing it. We see what you're doing. You are working so hard and doing so well. And I was like, I am thriving in one element of my life right now. But that's the reality of social media for me is it's very different than, I don't want to say different necessarily, but
It's a piece. It's only a piece of your life.
it is only a small piece of my life. And I don't share much of my regular daily life on there. I share educational content and fun. And that for me, I think
occasional
is really
cows.
healthy. Yeah. Occasional cows, occasional husband.
Only a little. I don't know what he looks like.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I only know that he has hands that people think that are not his hands.
Yes, this is true. I think what was funny though is so we have a lot of conversations about, what it's like to be on social media. And some of the things we talk about is, people will criticize anything. So even with it just being his hands, I was getting some DMs about his hands. And he's like, how do you want to put your face on there? And I was like, great question. Sometimes I don't. Because that's just the reality,
That's actually another interesting question that I have with regards to boundaries, because some of the things people find to critique are fascinating. They're fascinating for me as an outsider because I don't have any attachment to that, right? I didn't create the content. I didn't put in the effort and the energy or the hours on the weekends that you're doing instead of hanging out with your dog and your husband,
Right.
quite possibly. In these respects, we are the same. And so, are there also some boundaries you have with that engagement? You're looking for engagement for people, but at the same time, it's not all positive.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think usually I'll edit a video and I'll know ahead of time, okay, this is probably something that someone will say. For example, when I did my Valentine's Day nails and I had rotated, pink and red, very big controversies over in my neck of the woods here. But I knew that painting my nails these colors will probably draw attention. Most of it, 99.9%, totally positive. It was amazing. I also got some DMs that were like, you are a poor example of a potter because of your nails. And that's the reality. And it's very strange. But I've now prepared myself for that. So I knew with that color choice, that's what and this is like a micro version of what the internet can be, but so I knew going into it, this may happen. And it did.
What was it? I mean, now you've done enough and you've done it regularly enough to be able to anticipate that. But do you kind of remember early on? Because what I'm thinking about is the people who are like, they haven't really, maybe they have an Instagram account, but they haven't really started posting. They want to because they feel like this might be where their audience could be, and maybe it will be useful for them in growing the business they want to have. But frankly, it scares the living shit out of them.
Yeah, it's fair.
Like you and I both have, I think, grown a rather thick skin around some stuff that I can tell someone the price of a pot in person, face to face. And when they have a reaction of like, whatever, I can be like, well, healthcare is $600 a month. So what do you want me to do?
Yeah. I totally wish that I had a quick fix or like a easy, or if you tell yourself this, then it'll be less scary. But it is hard. And there are still days when I do find it hard. I think in reality, one of the things I try to remind myself all the time is that not everybody is your people, and that's okay. Think of it this way. And I think this was maybe a therapist that I read this from. Do you like everybody that you interact with in the world? Probably not. So the reality is not everyone's going to like you, and that's okay. That doesn't mean that you are any less than or anything like that. It's just as much as you don't love every video you come across, not everyone is going to love your video if it comes across their page. This is normal, and this is the reality of existence. That sounded really big, but
Mark it as the quote. No.
yeah, that's it.
And we're done. That's all we're looking. No.
I do think a lot about, and I've done again a lot. I like to read a lot from psychologists about social media because I think it's fascinating. But just this idea that like we as humans are not designed to take in this much feedback. We are not made to receive this much feedback. This is not something that we were built or designed to do. Our brains weren't wired this way. And now with social media, we are getting instantaneous feedback from, if I posted on my page right now, assuming that every follower saw it, which is not the reality. But anyway, I could potentially get 90,000 pieces of feedback. No one is meant to take that in. That is just not, no one is built for that. So it's kind of like if you do put yourself in that situation where you're open to that potentially happening, I mean, you have to figure out yourself, what am I going to do to limit that feedback so that it doesn't make me feel any type of way? And I'd like to say I've mastered it. I have not. There are still very much times when I don't love what I do. Luckily, they're the vast minority, but it's really hard to do.
Are there things that you do now to kind of help prepare for that? So like, I know sometimes people or I will post something and then set your phone down and run away for a little while and not look at it, not obsess or not refresh the app to see if anybody's liked it, right? Or I don't know, post at the start of the day because then you're going to go into teaching. And so or maybe that's more stressful because then when you open up your phone, it's like, holy crap, I now am inundated and didn't realize that this went off in the comments and World War III is now happening because people are arguing over the color of my nails.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, some of it, the nails is a funny example because that's like absurd.
It's hilarious.
But there have been some very real like people genuinely think you don't make pots.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just kind of offensive.
One of the weirdest ones was someone had screenshot one of my, and this is one of the cool things about doing so much social media is that someone found this and sent it to me. Someone had done a whole Instagram story with me, a photo of me in the background. And I was in a white shirt. The white shirt's a whole nother controversy.
Oh, yes.
Really fun. But I play into that. So that's on me. But anyway, so they had done this cool thing about like, if anybody thinks this is what pottery actually looks like, they are so wrong. This is what those fake Instagrammers look like. And it was a lot. They really put a lot in there. So I DM'd them.
I mean, that's very kind of you. I would have done a public comment.
Yeah. Well, see, here's the other thing I try to be extremely mindful of is if I post something, other people will see it. And I in no way ever want to send an internet mob to someone in any capacity. That is like a life fear of mine. So I don't want to do that to someone else.
That is a very good point. That is
my husband would do it if he had Instagram. He would, for sure. But no. So anyway, I politely sent them a DM. I was like, I saw your video and I just wanted you to know that this is actually me and this is what I do. And that kind of hurt. I think they actually wrote something back quite like, oh, I was just being funny. I love your content. And I was like, do you? It was a weird circumstance.
Because I also think, at least the thing I put in my head, and by no means do I deal with the number of people on the internet that you do, is it's created this weird, like, pseudo reality where people see that the drama gets the clicks and gets the reactions. And so that makes me wonder if that person kind of was like, oh, well, if I do something really controversial or something really whatever, I'm going to get eyeballs to me without thinking through, like, do you want those kind of eyeballs? Do you want to be known for that? Do you
Sure.
want,
Yeah.
like, I don't know.
Yeah. I could see that.
We've gone down another tangent.
Well, this all still relates. We're still talking about social media life and what that looks like. I don't want to scare anyone off of joining the internet, but I also want to be open and candid about, there are parts that are not great.
And the thing that I've said a few times now, maybe not on the podcast, but at least in our community, is like finding what works for you. I mean, number one, you don't have to do Instagram. If you hate it, if it's absolute torture, there are other ways to grow a business. Like, there are other business models. That was the entire point of me starting this podcast, was to be like, how can we get as many different stories of as many different approaches to how to make a living from the things you make and kind of dispel the myth? Because there are people out there who are doing what we do without Instagram, guys. Like, it's just the easier, quote unquote, path because it's a known thing, because it's a $1 billion company that puts tons of money into their own marketing.
Nailed
So,
it.
Well,
but it's true though. Instagram's not the only way to do things. You don't have to do e-commerce at all. If that is not your vibe, don't do it. I love sitting in my pajamas and packing boxes. I would rather do that than sit in a market all day. I know that there are some people that would so much rather sit in a market all day. We're all different. It's just about finding the method that makes you happy. Because at the end of it, if you're not happy doing this, then you won't do it.
And also, no method is going to be perfectly happy all the time, right?
Mhm.
And no method also is going to be like, well, if you do it this way, it won't cost as much. Because the thing I hear a lot of times is like, people doing a market because shipping and packaging is so expensive. Okay, well, but how much time did you just spend sitting there not being able to do anything else? Like, what's the value of your time? People gripe about wholesale or commissions or gallery commissions, and it's kind of like, okay, but they're spending money on marketing your stuff and therefore it's selling. So again, like, all of these versions, even if we just take the three big ones, as I'll say, like selling your work through a gallery, or let's go 4, selling your work through a gallery, selling wholesale, selling e-commerce, or selling in person, like direct to consumer at a market or whatever. All of those have some sort of cost to them. You just have to decide, like, which one are you the most okay with?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, because I've tried all of them. And for a while I was doing all of them at the same time. And then I sat back and I looked at galleries and I was like, wait a minute, I'm paying you for marketing. I love marketing. Why am I going to pay you for marketing when this is something that I greatly enjoy doing? And then I take a break from gallery work because I was like, oh, well, that doesn't make sense. But if you don't like marketing, oh, it's totally the way to go. Absolutely. It's so, so different. And there's pros and cons to everything, just like you said.
I love it. There's another question I don't want to forget, but I have absolutely no segue.
Okay. I can come up with a segue.
All right. Yeah, but then we have to edit it. I'm just keeping this,
right.
We're keeping this straightforward. Candid. There's a reason the tagline is candid conversations about the things that we make. When it comes to education online, because you are actually a professional, how do you how do you live in this space for yourself personally? But also, do you have any recommendations for new people new makers coming into the space to be able to sort out? I'm trying to figure out a polite way to put this, but there isn't one. The good from the bad. Because
Sure.
the brilliance of the internet is that you can access so many more resources than we could if we were still in the olden times of having to give up your life to go be an apprentice, to not get paid for a couple of years, to then become the master craftsman. And I'm happy for that. On the other hand, there's also so many resources. And just to back up a little bit, where I'm coming from, I saw this happen with photography when photography, it's been really interesting for me because I was a newbie photographer when digital was on the rise. I learned with film, I switched to digital, but it wasn't a big deal for me to switch. And I saw a lot of photographers get really grumpy about the fact that there were all these newbies like myself who could buy a camera and all of a sudden put their shingle out as a photographer. Because also the younger ones of us could make a website faster or were using Facebook because we had a .edu address to really harken back. And it's fascinating to me now because I see ceramics being in a very similar space 10 years later in terms of its popularity gain, in terms of people, the surgence with probably COVID of home studios and all of this. And there is such an increase of people teaching, which is great, but also a little tricky. If you don't know what you don't know, how do you figure out what's actually good education?
Yeah, I totally understand what you're saying because it's true. There are a lot of people sharing tips and tricks. And I think sometimes it's amazing. There's other times I've come across some and I go, oh, I don't know that that's what I would do. And it's hard to do that if you don't have that knowledge already, because you don't know what you don't know. And so if you see something, you may pick it up and maybe that is just not, I don't want to say like not good practice because there are a lot of things that there are a million ways to do it. So, there is definitely a lot of room for that here, but there are some things that are maybe misinformation, for example. And so it can be hard to navigate. I approach my social media very similar to how I approached looking for a college. And I actually would suggest that a lot of people do the same thing. One of the first things
I
that
did
I
not
did,
see this coming. I'm so intrigued right
I've been
now.
thinking about this. I always, when I was looking at colleges, would research the artists that were actively teaching there. I would always look at their work and think, is that work that I aspire to be like one day? And that doesn't mean I want my work to be identical to theirs. But if I could look at it and I would think that is aspirational, like I'll use my college that I did go to. Jeff Campana was one of the professors that I looked up, and he had this beautiful collection of thrown ceramic work that was breaking apart and put back together. And I saw that and I was like, that is someone that I want to learn from because that work is something that I have no concept on how to make. And I did that with their sculpture professors as well. And I looked at several of the faculty and I was really impressed with what I saw. And so that is where I decided to go to school. And I actually think Instagram can be viewed in a similar way. Now, I'll get into the caveat here in a second, but it's not a bad idea to watch someone's tips and tricks video and then go to their page and say, okay, what kind of pots are they actively making? And just seeing what's out there. I think the harder thing about Instagram is that a lot of that can really come down to photography skills. And I blame you for that because you teach everyone how to take good photos.
I was just uh-huh.
No, but you can get mesmerized by the quality of a photo, which there
Absolutely.
is something beautiful about that. But it can be tricky sometimes to say, okay, it looks beautiful. Is this a quality pot? I don't know. How do you tell from a photo? It's very difficult. So it can be hard to break down. I have some potters that I love that I have seen in real life who make beautiful work, and their Instagram photos are like crooked and blurry and those kinds of things. So it's not always the easiest way to go onto their page and to check out their pots, but it's something you can do that I oftentimes do rely on and has been a helpful tool, if that makes sense.
It totally makes sense. I was just looking up a resource to cite because I don't want to get the name wrong. What is the movie that OSA is helping create? Have you seen this?
I have no idea what you're talking
All right. I will also send it your way because I feel like you will really enjoy it. Vessels for the, there we go. Okay. This is actually one of my struggles because it is my fault because I teach people how to take photos. Because, I mean, look, we're not going to turn back time. Instagram exists, the internet exists. That's a thing. And so because of that, there's this disparity between master craftspeople and potters who maybe have been doing this for decades, who would be incredible to learn from on the internet, who just don't use these platforms natively, who don't, like, for example, the woman I was learning from, who's a dear mentor of Francesco and I's, who we went and visited in Australia, Sandy Lockwood, like, she's not posting 5 times a week on Instagram. Like, she kind of does it out of obligation because she feels like she should. But I was like, Sandy, why? Why do you, like, don't worry about it. Like, She sells out of workshops in her own studio. She's making what she wants to make. Like, that should be fine. And it's what OSA was working on putting together, and is, I shouldn't say was, they're actively working on putting together a movie that really gets to the heart of this in a way about the work of David MacDonald, called Vessels for the Human Spirit. Because what she saw happening, especially during 2020, was this huge influx of audience coming. I think to her page, I'm probably summarizing the story really poorly, but there was this influx of people that all of a sudden was coming to her because she had an Instagram and she was using it. And she was like, yeah, but I create what I make out of this legacy of other potters that I have learned from, and this lineage and this heritage that gets missed when someone's really good at Instagram and maybe mediocre at pottery, or mediocre at teaching, or mediocre, and I don't know. There's not an answer, but it's one of those things that I think we all have to stay critical about, I guess, when we're consuming the content.
Well, I did just this week actually tell my student, I guess this was last week. I told my students that, it's okay to question your teachers. And they were like, what? What are you talking? What? We can. And I was like, please, if I say something and you go, that doesn't make sense with some of the knowledge I have from whatever else you bring to the table, tell me. That's how we have real meaningful conversations. And I would say the same thing about online. Question who you take information from, and by all means question me away. I mean, I have not been doing this as long as many other people. I have a ton to learn, and I can only share what I know or what I think I know. You know what I mean? I would encourage everyone to do the same thing that I tell my students to do. Question your teachers, no matter what platform you're getting them from, even if it's in a book. Question your teachers, because that's where real learning can happen.
There's so many more things I want to talk about, but then part of me was like, wow, that was a really good, that was another big, deep statement where I'm like, is that where I stop? But no.
Oh, yeah. Keep grilling me. I'm ready.
Well, I also think it's really important to think about what are the promises being made, right? I think with pottery, it's a little bit more obvious that, if you want to learn a specific style, you look at the work being made, you want to learn that style, you learn from that person. And that's fine. In some ways, dare I say, regardless of their skill level, because if you want to learn to make the pots that they're making and that's what they're teaching, straightforward enough. I think in matters of business and marketing, when it comes to photography and business courses and stuff out there that I get the ads for all the time, because that's what I talk about, so that's what the algorithm thinks I want too. It gets a little muddier because you get into people making promises that are, to me, manipulative, right? Like, I am never going to say, take this photo course and you will 10x your sales because of the pictures. I can't promise that. Maybe for some people, I have had a student who sold out at a market because she was more confident posting pictures before the market. So then more people came because more people were excited. But that doesn't happen every single, there's a lot of things out there where people are promising, like, I did this, so let me teach you how to do it. And it's like, well, but did you just do that for yourself? Like, I guess it would be like if you all of a sudden were like, come learn how to have 100,000 follower Instagram account from me, or whatever, or 90. I exaggerated for you. Sorry.
Thanks. No, that was manifesting right there.
There we go. But, you've done that for yourself, but how many times have you redone that? If you could say, hey, I've grown 20 accounts to over 100,000 followers, and they have then da-da-da-da-da. Okay, now we're talking. But just because somebody does something for themselves doesn't necessarily mean it's applicable across the board, I guess is the point I was trying to get to.
Yeah, I think that is so incredibly accurate. And I think this a lot whenever I see people talk about, and I'm not a full-time potter. I try to never give tips on being a full-time potter because I'm not one. I don't do this full time. I have a whole other job and whatnot. But when I see people say, here's how I became a full-time potter and you can do it too, I'm always a little bit red flaggy because there are just so many factors that go into being a successful potter. And this runs with anything, I think. There just are so many factors. And some of it, of course, could come down to the clay and the pots themselves, but a lot of it can come down to where are you located? That's it. That actually, that's it. Where are you located?
Or who did you know before you became one,
Exactly.
right? Did you already have an audience before you even started making pots? So now all of a sudden it looks like you have that many people buying pots from you, but actually it's because you had already whatever. I don't know.
No, totally. I mean, that's why I don't tell people if you want to go into education, don't even look at an education degree. Because although I don't have an education degree, I'm also aware that I had some other strange experiences that led into me having that education background without the degree. So I'm always trying to be wary of what I'm promoting and how I'm promoting because I know that if I didn't have those opportunities that people offered me, and out of the kindness they offered me those opportunities, I wouldn't do what I do now. But it was because people offered me things.
The other tricky part about this is that now that I'm 14 years in, I talk a lot about having been self-employed for 14 years as kind of a marker of experience. At the same time, I don't think time is the only experience marker, right? I don't think you have to have been doing something for 10 years before you should start teaching. But then again, also at the same time, and you and I had talked about this a little bit on threads with some other people, there's this tricky balance for me between having enough experience with a craft or with a skill or with whatever it is that somebody might be teaching online before you start teaching it to have a well-rounded understanding of the whole thing in many different ways, in many ways outside of your own aesthetic, in many ways outside of your own experience. And I think that naturally can come with time, but it's not the only marker, I guess is what,
Yeah. No, I understand what you're saying because I think a lot about, well, why am I teaching? That's my big life question. When I do think about it, a lot of it goes back to, well, I had a really hard time learning. I have dyslexia. So I really struggled with learning. And so I was always with tutors and I was always working on my schoolwork a lot. Maybe that's where my work ethic comes from. Actually, dyslexia and school being so hard. I struggled a lot with how to learn, which I think helped me in turn discover how to teach, at least how to teach in a way that is uniquely me and makes sense to me. Because I struggled so much, I think I've learned how to break down information in different ways than maybe others who don't have dyslexia, who haven't had a teacher say, I know you're studying. Why are you still failing these tests? If you haven't had that experience, then you might not have the same version of teaching. You might go into it a little bit differently, if that makes sense.
Yep. Oh, I think the fastest way to figure out whether or not you know a subject is to try and teach it, which is probably the very wrong thing for me to say when we were just talking about, like, let's not jump into teaching too quickly.
Right.
But
Well,
I remember it even from back in the day when I was still playing the oboe and I was teaching like junior high kids how to play it because it came really naturally to me. It wasn't playing an instrument. Well, playing the piano was torture that I brought upon myself. Playing the oboe was really easy. And so then trying to teach someone how to do it when I was just like, I don't know, I put it in my mouth and it works. That's terrible. There's a sound bite for you.
we have to cut that. I can't.
I don't think I don't know where I could cut it at. Oh my.
Do we need to redo it?
I'm comfortable enough with myself to just leave that in there for anyone who gets this far into the podcast. There's your little Easter egg. You're welcome.
I don't know how to follow this up. Well, but I do understand the gist of what you're saying. This might be the I'm taught all day kick again.
Exactly. I was talking about the oboe, you guys. Come on.
Yes. Well, so I think that, there are some things that people naturally will take to quicker than others, like just skills in general. Math was not it for me. Math was it for my brother. He's an astroparticle physicist. So,
Yeah, that would do it.
yeah. What an interesting family, by the way, with the artist and the astroparticle physicist.
Yeah. Also, part 2, can we get him in on I have so many ideas for your Instagram right now.
Yeah. It's a fun one. But anyway, so we all have things that we naturally can take to a little bit quicker than others. And I do think that that sometimes can help you teach it more quickly as well. But I do also think there should be a big distinction between doing something well and teaching something well, because they are different skills. No matter what the field is, they are different skills.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I also think the other thing I personally am experiencing, so I didn't teach photography until I was teaching it for ceramicists. And as I was saying before, I saw photography go through this phase and is still in this phase where it became really popular 10 years ago or however many. And so therefore teaching it became the next thing to do. And to be frank, that became the popular thing because making a living by taking the actual photos became harder. And that's a little bit of what I'm seeing with pottery right now, too, is that there's such an influx of new people selling ceramics that for the people who maybe were here before or were doing a decent amount of selling, but because the pool was smaller, there were less fish in the pond or whatever metaphor we want to use, they were able to sell enough or whatever. And even new potters also who like it seems like on Instagram, it seems really easy. It seems to be you can sell really quickly. And then all of a sudden you start trying to do it and it's actually a lot harder than they thought. And so then teaching becomes like, oh, well, this is a lot easier to make money in because there's the influx of the popularity, because there's so many new people who want to learn. And it's kind of this loop of a cycle. At the same time, I don't think education is the like cash cow everybody thinks. The perception is like this is a passive income or a great way to make money. And I'm like, excuse me? Like, did I miss the line for the passive part? Because holy crap, this is really hard.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think you've touched on two hot educator topics. Those who can't do teach is such a popular phrase to say. And I hear it all the time when people talk about teaching art. They're like, oh, well, you must, and I've had people say it to me as well. They're like, well, you must have gone into education because you couldn't make it. You couldn't do that and sell pots yourself. So that's a very common thing that people say. It's a common attitude that I'm sure there's a lot of educators listening to this going, yes, absolutely. I hear that. And I don't know who thinks it's a cash cow, but they must not know a teacher. I really don't.
I think, and I guess I mean specifically teaching online, obviously not teaching in person.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
I think the idea of educating being passive in any capacity is outlandish to me as an educator. There is nothing that you do I mean, even when I post a reel, I am now still getting comments on videos from 2 months ago that are like, hey, how can you redefine how you did blah, blah, blah? I mean, and that's just online teaching. In real life, you could ask way more questions daily. So there's really, it is a very active thing to do. I mean, you're always doing things.
And I think where I'm getting that perception is also in the people who are marketing to people who want to become online educators, right? There's a lot of, I don't even want to like list names because I don't want people to go there because it's not, a lot of it's very manipulative marketing. It's a lot of like use these psychological strategies to get people to buy stuff to take the course to buy the stuff. And I'll be the first one to say, I have bought those courses. I have learned those strategies. I even used them the first time I did the styling course and then very quickly have learned like, oh, wait, hold on a second. That's literally taking away people's critical thought. You're taking, as you start to stack these things together to say like, buy now and get these bonuses, like, the clock ticking in front of the buy now button to get people to make an urgent decision, the scarcity, all of the stuff. And there's this gaining popularity online of the belief of like, if you're just one step ahead of people, then you're ready to build an online course or teach whatever. And I guess and I don't mean it in the like, be helpful, like, please be helpful to your fellow makers. I think that's I learned things from so many people in my community studio in Chicago that helped me leapfrog past so many making issues. But I think helping each other is different than like when people monetize things. Then I get a little scared. Like, is this legit? Is this safe for people? Is this accurate? Is it misinformation? And that probably that therein lies more of my questions for you of helping people discern what is quality education or not. Because it's like when somebody starts to make it their business model, I ironically bristle given that I'm currently writing my second online.
Well, but I understand what you're saying. And I think we do see a rise of monetized content right now. At least I have in the ceramics community. I'm seeing more and more of it. And I say that as someone who does produce monetized content. And I do produce paid things. And I think gosh, it is so tricky to try to discern as a viewer, do people really like this? Are they actually trying to, sell me on something? And I can say from my own experience, when I do produce something, I mean, I have said no to several things that I have tried. And I say, this is not something I can back. I don't put my stamp of approval on it. You just won't see a video on it because I also don't want to drag people because that's not my personality. But, I am very critical about what I choose to actually promote and who I choose to work with. Not everyone is that way. And I know that, but it's hard. It's hard as a viewer. And I wish I had easy ways to kind of direct people on how to navigate that. I mean, I guess my only thing is look at the content that they're producing that's not monetized. And if it seems to all fall in the same line, well, then we probably know that it's a genuine thing. But yeah, I mean, it's really hard. It's hard to exist online these days.
I think for me, it goes back to having a genuine community of people that you can say, hey, has anyone taken this course? Hey, has anyone heard of this teacher, done this workshop, paid for this residency, whatever it might be, to get actual human feedback? Or even if you don't have that, asking whoever you're considering learning from for those resources. I literally just did this a couple days ago. Someone who was debating about joining the community, and I of course asked one of our members permission first and said, can I share your contact info, so they could have a separate conversation without me to give a very honest and candid feedback of what it is, what it isn't, what they liked, what they didn't. And if I feel like if an educator doesn't have that or isn't willing to do it, or, there's some few different things that would be like red flags of, well, what's going on here?
Yeah, it's like when I'm online shopping and companies don't post reviews. I'm always like, ooh, but so you don't want to give a platform to people to share their thoughts? I don't know that I want to buy that sweater or whatever the item is, I do think it's similarly when you're looking to sign up in an online course. And what I do now, I think when I am investigating things to see if they're a good resource, is I'll type it in online and I'll end up going to places like Reddit or something like that that's not affiliated with the actual brand because I want to find whenever, because some companies do hide things. They delete comments, they only share whatever, which I think they actually may have a right to do. I don't know how that works legally, but I want to go somewhere where it's not filtered. And typically, at least recently, that has seemed like Reddit is a place where I can easily find tons of people's opinions on something.
Yes. Although that slightly scares me for you.
Well, yeah, a lot of people have told me not to be on Reddit, that I am not built for that. I do really only use it to Google. I use it at Google. That is like,
okay. I have only experienced Reddit through friends sharing things in like a group text or whatever. And I'm like, dear Lord, how do people where do people have this much time? From two workaholics here, I want to understand the time people have to sit on the internet. It's like next door also. Like what's
yeah. But I'm kind of thankful though, because sometimes like on Ring, even they have like a messaging feature on Ring and I'll see posts like, did you see the cop car go down this street? What's going on? And I'm like, oh, I'm glad someone's watching out. What is going on? But for drama, this is what I do in my free time.
This is the segue into like what hobbies do you actually have now that Instagram is not a hobby, but I'm like, where's the time? Because you have 2 full-time jobs and I've been there and I'm trying to work my way out of all the full-time jobs into 1, maybe 2. I'm trying to go from like 3 to 2.
Yeah.
Baby steps.
Well, I'm going from 2 to 3.
Wait, what are you adding? Wait, is this like a breaking news right now? Maker's Playbook podcast, breaking news.
I can only say so much, but it would be awfully cool if I produced other things that weren't ceramics and weren't merch. That's as vague as I'm going to go there.
My brain was assuming merch, but you've just put the kibosh on that.
Not merch, not pottery.
All right.
But in my wheelhouse.
Pottery adjacent?
Maybe.
Oh, man. I feel like I've just stumbled upon my I'm completely joking, just a side note for anybody listening, but my marketing brain now is like, well, this is clearly the carousel post that I have to create, is that to have everybody guessing, and I'm like, this is the way. I have no desire to go viral whatsoever. The whole thing sounds very stressful to me, and you can chime in on that since you actually have. However, I'm like, this is my viral post material right here. Like, breaking news, Maker's Playbook podcast. What do you think Hope is going to do next?
I'm going to be like Taylor Swift. It's another album, you guys. Not when you expected it. This is my second Taylor Swift reference. I'm sorry.
That's true. That's true. Accurate. I'm kind of impressed. I feel like you've showed great personal restraint.
Thank you. Thank you. I have. But no, yeah, I'm going from 2 businesses to 3. So
we should talk about this before you're completely all in, if it's not too late, because I've been there, and it's a unique life experience.
I am in. We're in it.
Okay. All right. Well, you know how to reach me when you need support, because there's a very small number of people on the planet who I think firsthand understand the insanity that is that life. So.
Well, see, here's my thought, though. As a teacher, we don't work in the summers. So really, then I'm like, I'm really only doing 3 jobs for like a couple of months out of the year.
Hold on. Just,
we don't need to do the math.
I was just going to say September, October, November, December, January, February, March, April, May. Okay. Yep. 9 is a couple. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. See, you said it, easy peasy.
It's like looking into a mirror right now.
Because we're both wearing green and we look amazing. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, totally.
I knew it.
What is something, and I am going to wrap us up here because I've taken way too much of your time, and we should go spend time with our dogs and our husbands individually, not plural, just in case anyone was confused. Is there something with regards to social media life that you feel like people don't really see or understand, whether that just be like, hey, like, please don't forget I'm a human, like, hi, my name is Hope, like, from your personal experience, or whether that be also for people who are trying to get into this world, trying to grow an audience in this way?
Yeah. Well, I would like to say, hi, my name's Hope. I am an actual person, because I do truly think that sometimes people forget. And I mean this in so many different capacities when we talk about media, just trying to remember that, like I was saying earlier, we are not built to take this much input. I always try to really step back and think, if I'm leaving a comment on something, is it something that person really needs to hear? And if it's positive, I mean, I will always leave the positive stuff, throw it out like confetti, right? But if it's something more critical, I always do try to step back and think, is this actually something that is going to be beneficial to this person, whatever it is that I'm writing? It's the same way that I teach my students to critique in class, really think about what you're saying and think about, is it something that needs to really be said? Because I think if everyone could remember to do that, I mean, man, what a beautiful place we would live in, right? So just something that I think is great to check yourself with. And if you want to exist on social media land, I welcome you. It is a fun place overall. We've done a lot of talking on this episode about some of the cons, and I do think it's important to go into it knowing what those are. I think it's a disservice to you if we don't talk about those things. But in general, I've said this a couple of times, I wouldn't do this if I didn't truly have a lot of fun. It's a great time. It is so fun. I so enjoy it. 99.9% of the interactions I have are really, really fun. So there are a ton of pros, and I don't mean to scare you off of it, but I do want to be realistic that it's not all rainbows sometimes.
Although there are always cows.
There are always cows on the internet, except the scammers will never give them to you no matter how hard you ask. That's the soundbite.
That is the soundbite. And before we close, I need to know if there's a highlight about that. So if people are like, what the hell are they talking about with cows? Can they find this? There's a cow's highlight.
There is a cow's highlight. If you click on it, you might get more confused, but you should click.
Oh, for anyone who has stayed for the unhinged second half of this conversation, who maybe doesn't actually know where to find you on the internet, because those people do still exist, where do you want to send them?
You can find me on Instagram at Limyansky Studios. It's a very long last name, but hopefully you'll put it somewhere in the title of this so that people can read it off of it.
I will do that. I will link it in the show notes too so they can just click it. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for taking this much time on a school night also. Even though this podcast goes on Friday mornings, we record all of the time. So I very much appreciate the Monday night conversation is a unique time to carve out for everybody.
Yeah, and thanks for having me. It's been so fun. I think I've had you on my page a couple of times, so this is actually quite nice to be like, oh, now we're doing it on all the platforms. I don't know, it's fun. I always love talking to you, so.
I'm pretty sure I don't know that I had ever gone live on Instagram. Maybe once or twice. Yeah. Never as like a guest. So the very first time we did it, that's a real gem for someone to go scroll back and find.
It was good. It was a good time.
We were fine. Awesome. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much, Hope. I so appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so we got a little goofy there at the end, having both taught and worked all day long. So if there's only one thing you take away from listening to two people who put themselves out onto the internet on a pretty regular basis, I hope it's that clearly neither one of us take ourselves too seriously. And frankly, I think that's sort of mandatory when it comes to being on social media. Of course, I also hope that you took a lot more information away from our conversation in order to perhaps set your own healthy boundaries with social media, whether that be how you use it or how you engage with others, and also vetting all of the resources that are out there shouting for our attention. If you have any questions about any of this stuff or want a second opinion before investing in a resource, always feel free to send me a DM at The Maker's Playbook on Instagram. I probably get a lot less messages than Hope does on a daily basis, so hit me up maybe before you jump into her inbox, just so we can help her continue to take those luxurious weekends off from all her IG work. Sound good? And as I mentioned, if you do want to really deep dive on the conversation, not only one-on-one with me in my DMs, but with an entire group of supportive, amazing makers from all over the world, full-timers and part-timers, lifelong side hustlers and newbies. Well, the place all of that is happening is inside of the community. To kick off the start of 2024, we are continuing to talk about how we set and keep goals, while also gently holding each other accountable to those goals. But coming in April, we'll be joined by my very favorite Instagram marketing expert and strategist, Allie Mason, for a very special masterclass. Yes, my friends, a big new thing happening inside of the community this year, included with the cost of being a member, are a number of formal trainings, workshops, and masterclass days with outside professionals focused on helping all of us figure out how the heck to make a living from the things that we make. Now, having worked with Allie myself, her strategic focus is always on what is sustainable specifically for each of us as small, independent businesses at our own unique stages of business, lives, and frankly, in alignment with the goals we actually want. No trends that we have to follow. We're not talking about vanity metrics and follower numbers purely for the sake of growth, but actual meaningful measurements of what you need from your business for yourself and your life. After all, who cares if you reach 10,000 followers if no one is buying your ceramics, right? Long story short, I am clearly crazy excited to have Allie joining us because I'm talking about something that's happening in April, already at the very start of March. I was about to say February. If you want to be a part of all of that, visit makersplaybook.com/community to learn more about what's going on in there and come join us. speaking of March, given that this airs on March 1st, NCECA is coming up very quickly. Not only will we be having a live podcast taping again, thanks to the hard work of Ben Carter and the Brickyard Network, but I will also be presenting all by myself, camera in hand, while I photograph pottery live in front of whoever shows up and answer as many questions live as I possibly can from whoever shows up, at least within the hour that I have. I'll be sending out all the details on both of those, the room numbers, the times, etc., to our email list as soon as I have them. So if you're coming to NCECA and want to meet up, be sure you're on the email list by visiting makersplaybook.com/newsletter. Now, I do know that my solo photography Q&A session is happening on Thursday, March 21st. And that night, on Thursday, March 21st, is also when the Pot Stars pop-up is happening from 6 to 10 p.m. at the Mainline Brewery. I would say that it's a very safe assumption that after being on stage by myself, answering questions that I don't have a way to prepare for entirely in advance because the questions are live from whoever shows up to my talk, well, let's just say it's a safe assumption that I will either be celebrating or commiserating with a tasty beverage that evening at the Mainline Brewery. So if you want to hang out at NCECA Thursday night at the Mainline Brewery for the Pot Stars pop-up is a great place to do so. Now, this has been the world's longest outro, so let's see if we can't wrap it up. This episode was made possible in part thanks to our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by the Rosenfield collection of functional ceramic art. The collection exists as an online source for research and inspiration, featuring photos of objects made by over 1,000 artists. The images are high quality and can be used with no permission required, making them a great source for students and teachers. To find out more, visit www.rosenfieldcollection.com. A special thank you to the Archie Bray Foundation for sponsoring this episode of the Maker's Playbook. The Bray Clay business is your best source for Bray epoxy, a two-part moldable epoxy intended for post-firing repairs. Working like clay, it's easy to shape, texture, fill gaps, and recreate missing parts. Bray epoxy is sold in tan, white, and black base colors, with a 9-color kit that will allow you to perfectly disguise your repair. Order anytime online at archiebrayclay.com. Audio post-production of this podcast is made possible by help from Christy Kotzvan, with promotional material assistance from Queenie Maliki. The Maker's Playbook podcast is recorded on the original homelands of the Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee people, where the people of Wisconsin's sovereign Anishinaabe, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Oneida, and Mohican nations remain present. Until next time, my friends, go get back to making your dreams a reality. Because together, we've got this.
This podcast is a production of the Brickyard Network, an extension of the Archie Bray Foundation for the Ceramic Arts. To find out more about our lineup of ceramic podcasts, visit brickyardnetwork.org.